My name is Eric Schmeck. I am the manager of the Southern Boone County Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you all to our program today. Um, Before we get started, there's just some Zoom sort of housekeeping. At the bottom of the screen, if you hover or tap, you should see a hand icon and a chat bubble. Those are two ways you can ask questions. Um, I would ask that maybe you put them in the chat. That way we can just save them for the end of the presentation. I can read them off to Bill. All your microphones are muted. Once the presentation gets going, you can raise your hand or use the chat. Let me know. And if you encounter any technical difficulties, you can also use the chat to let me know. They're very likely my fault because I am a little bit of novice on hosting webinars. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our speaker. His name is Bill Ruppert. He splits his time between Ashland and Kirkwood, where he owns and manages the St. Louis office of the National Nursery Products. A few years after the initial plantings of our native landscaping here, Bill stepped in when he noticed that too much mulch was being applied, in some cases enough to kill some of the plants. He connected us with a local landscaper and made an expanded planting plan that utilized more of our space. He now basically works in a volunteer role as a consultant and advocate of the native landscaping at Southern Boone County Public Library, and he is even helping to produce a documentary on the project. I'm sure you're going to hear more about all of that from him. So now I'm going to pass it on to Bill. Go ahead, I think.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here with everyone, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit of the history and what we're doing here at the Ashland branch of the Daniel Boone Regional Library Group. I've really enjoyed this opportunity. I volunteer on behalf of Grow Native, an organization that I've been involved with now for over 21 years, and I've seen a lot of changes occur, a lot of for the good, in making folks aware of the benefits of native plants. And when I saw the native landscape emerging here at the Daniel Boone Ashland Library, I was excited. And as Eric mentioned, I saw some opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a little PowerPoint put together that I'd like to share with you. So when I give this talk, a lot of people don't really know where Ashland is, and so I've got my little map here to show. And Ashland is definitely a growing community. It's changed quite a bit since we purchased our property 4 miles due west of here back in 1994. And back in that time, this library was not here in its present form. Ashland, as I say, is a growing community, and there's a lot of interest right now in there is a beautification committee that the community has put together to enhance the downtown area of Ashland. But located not too far from the downtown core is the library. And this is a photo of what the library landscape looked like when I first saw it in its first year. And one of the things I noticed, as Eric mentioned, is that there were big voids in that landscape. And what I had noticed is that there really was a disproportionate mix of grasses to wildflowers. With the native grasses, they're wonderful plants, but they can kind of dominate the landscape if their proportion is not well calculated. So Just to kind of give you a little tour of the before, you'll see quite a few voids in the landscape, and you see mostly the native grasses. So I came to the Friends Board of the garden or of the library with some thoughts about enhancing this native landscape. All the plants that were planted were Missouri natives. There were no what we call nativars or any non-native plants in the landscape. But one of the first things I noticed, there wasn't any milkweed, and milkweed is vital for our monarchs in their life cycle. And so we talked about including some milkweed in that landscape. Grow Native has an education program called the Monarch Cafe, and its purpose is to educate, raise awareness about the value of milkweed as a critical part of the life cycle of the monarch. Because without milkweed, there are no monarchs. The caterpillars require, it's the only plant they feed on. Once the monarch is a butterfly, then the nectar of milkweed flowers as well as other flowers is beneficial, but the caterpillar or the larva can only feed on milkweed. And this frame shows there's quite a bit of diversity beyond the orange milkweed, which most people are aware of. It's one of the most popular. But there's others. Marsh milkweed is one we've put here in the landscape because we have kind of a wet area on one corner of the property. And then we've also included some of the others. We haven't put the common milkweed in because it can be a little bit of aggressive. It's great for a field landscape application, but we're trying to create a landscape that we're not having to manage a more rampant spreader. The other aspect of the native landscape is its support for pollinators. And we all know about the honeybee, which is an important pollinator. The honeybee is a immigrant from Europe. It's not native, but it does a lot of good in pollination. But there are all these other pollinators and so many species of bees, many of them you never see. There's some of them are so small, or they have a life cycle that isn't as prominent as the bumblebee, which is native, and then of course the honeybee. So there's a lot going on in the world of pollination and promoting plants that support pollinators. Billion Pollinator Garden Challenge is one of those. So Grow Native came up with a program to further reinforce that awareness, and we have the Pollinator Buffet supporting the food web. And we're part of that food web because a third of the foods we eat, the vegetables and fruits we eat, require pollination. So again, we Grow Native with the Pollinator Buffet. We have plant tags that are helpful at the retail level for consumers looking for plants that support pollinators. And we didn't feature every plant that supports pollinators, but we picked a group of about 10 that if you planted all 10, you would have color in your garden from spring through autumn. And that was the intent, is to have something in bloom that's beneficial to both us from an aesthetic standpoint, but also supporting pollinators throughout the entire growing season. So based on that, it seemed like that was a good idea to incorporate some of those plants into the landscape. I did an analysis of, well, how could we fill the voids with some new plants or additional plants of what's already out there. And again, since we had so many grasses, we're really looking at more of the blooming perennials. And right now, I just was outside looking at the landscape. That yellow flower, which is the Ozark primrose, is just starting to bloom. And it's a very large flower, and it's a low growing plant, so it does great along the borders of the landscape. Below it is our native verbena, which likes it kind of dry. So you want to put that up against the curb where soil heats up and stays fairly dry. Then we had this area that is really devoid of, was devoid of plants. And what we found is that every year, so much bark mulch, wood bark mulch was applied to the landscape, and it was suffocating many of the blooming perennial natives. So we could kind of see what's tolerant of that in this photo. Some plants can put up with that, but in looking at the voids, what could we plant to fill that in once we modified the and reduced the application of mulch? And so we were looking at adding some texture, some bold texture to the landscape, and that's where Prairie Dock, which is up in the upper right-hand corner there, that has very bold foliage and then sends up a flower spike that's quite tall. So you want to put that kind of in the middle of the border. And then for some fall interest in a woody type shrub, that purple berry is our native American beauty berry. And that's the most asked about plant in this landscape in the fall. And it's pretty striking. It does have a tendency, the woody part does have a tendency to die back during a very cold winter, but I noticed here it's all sprouting from the base and it'll be a full shrub again. Down below to the left, we have the marsh milkweed, which along with the rose mallow, which is our native hardy hibiscus, I suggested planting that down below the slope where it's more moist. So again, just to reinforce the amount of mulch, and really the plan was to replant in such a way that the plants are going to cover the ground and there won't be a need to mulch because the plants provide the mulch with shading the ground, and also, by shading the ground, we're able to restrict unwanted weed growth. So there again, looking at possibilities of what we could do to get some more color in this landscape. So over on the left, we have our native black-eyed Susan, Rebecca, which is quite a flower show in its time. Down below for late season color, the aromatic aster, which is at the end of the season, which you'll see a little bit later in some of the after pictures. Over on the right, again, we have some large beds where we want to get some tall flowers. So we have the cup plant. And then since this landscape is not irrigated and it doesn't need to be irrigated for these natives, the glade coneflower I see is just starting to bud up out in that landscape. And it is tough. It likes it kind of on the dry side. That's different than the purple coneflower that is so widely used, which we also have in this landscape. And then we also put some goldenrod in, and there's a lot of different species of goldenrod. Some are more aggressive than others. The stiff goldenrod, more of a clump forming goldenrod, and doesn't get too out of hand in a landscape. So then we have along the building, again, excessive mulch really reduced the plantings there. And so along the border, along the building, again, a repeat to carry on a little consistency of, color and texture and time of year of flower, using some that I've already mentioned. But we also, along the east side, which is the front side of the library, we planted some aromatic sumac, which is in the upper right-hand corner, has great fall foliage, really a tough plant for landscapes that aren't irrigated. And then one of my favorites down below is our native hydrangea, the smooth hydrangea, hydrangea arborescens, which is really a pollinator magnet. When it's in bloom, those flowers are just covered with beneficial pollinating insects. So then we also had out in the parking lot, it's always the tough environment because it's, it can get pretty hot out there. The thing I noticed in the islands, it seemed like we could get a little more height in plantings near the light pole there. And so I suggested again some Prairie Dock, some ironweed gets a little bit tall. And we ended up using the smoke tree, or the native smoke tree, which is the fall foliage plant you see on the right. We found another place for that to be applied. So the landscape, when I arrived, it was being managed kind of in a neat and clean way, I guess, where in the fall, all the grasses were cut, everything was cut back. And again, with all the mulching, the only thing you could see were these tufts of prairie dropseed grass. And we're kind of missing out cutting back the foliage in the fall. I'll show you at the same time of year at our Kirkwood train station in my hometown. This is what you had that time of year, and you can see the aromatic aster in full bloom. The grasses are kind of showing their thing. And so there's still some interest in that landscape at that time of year, and it's also beneficial for all the pollinating insects once again. So when we got into working on trying to bring this landscape back to life, I mean, I was just amazed. There was 6 inches of bark mulch out in some areas of that landscape, and that's why there wasn't anything growing there. Really, these native herbaceous plants, perennials, they really don't know wood bark mulch. I mean, that's not in their natural habitat. I mean, they're used to coming out from underneath the leaf litter and, all the foliage and that had fallen down after the winter that kind of naturally mulches the landscape. So the first thing we did is we made use of some of the overplanted grass areas, areas overplanted with grasses, and we moved, in this case, prairie dropseed to fill some of the voids that could be further filled with some of the flowering perennials. And then in the spring of 2016, thanks to the friends of the Daniel Boone Library, they funded the plants to be added to the landscape. And so in May 2016, the plants were delivered. And again, before we could plant, we needed to remove the excessive mulch. And you can just see here's a close-up of these plants trying to emerge out of all this mulch, and you can see where we've started to remove the mulch. There was so much of it there. The best way to remove it, the mulch, was to use blowers, and they blew the mulch out onto the sidewalk. And we retained some of the mulch because we wanted to have something there to keep the weeds from coming up while the new plants were getting established. So you can see there are a lot of new plants going in to fill the voids. And some of them were in gallon-sized containers like Baptisia or false indigo, which is a little bit of a larger plant, where most of the plants were in a 4.5-inch container, which is really ideal. It's easier to plant a 4.5-inch pot than a full-size gallon. Even though the soil here is just fine, probably the soil's a little bit too good for some of the plants. Some of these plants would rather be growing along a rocky slope like you see along some of the highways down in the highway cuts down in the Ozarks. So, I mean, it's amazing. Those black-eyed Susans weren't there before 2016, planted in May, and you can see they're really starting to show their color already in September of 2016. Now, some of the other plants are still getting established, but we had berries the first year on the American Beauty Berry. Here we are, here you can see September, and still in November of that year, we had kind of a mild fall, so we didn't have a hard freeze yet. So we still had coneflowers blooming. We had the aromatic aster, the lavender blue flowers coming on, and then the black-eyed Susans. So in 2017, we still had some voids. You never get them all covered the first time around. So we thought we'd go in with some more Asclepias, or the orange milkweed, just to further reinforce and have ample milkweed for the monarch caterpillars. And again, we were still tweaking the landscape that next year. We also, that year, there's these two planting pits, I call them, on the patio on the east side of the library. And there is where we planted the American smoke tree, which is Catinus obavatus, want the Latin name. And that's a small ornamental tree that grows in rocky soil and is pretty tolerant of urban conditions. And so the idea is that is a small tree that will eventually form a canopy over that paved area, and there's a bench on that paved area. So in the summer, you have a little bit of shade. And then under that, as a ground cover, which is one of my favorite native ground covers, is its common name is golden groundsel. It has a couple of different common names. Botanical name is Pacra obovata, and right now it's blooming in the landscape. But when it's not blooming, you have nice ground cover foliage that will fill in that area. So again, we have a way to reduce weed growth and makes a nice carpet of green in that small space. So this is Kelly Redford, who manages this landscape on contract with the library district. Very knowledgeable about perennial garden care, but this was kind of a new venture for her to learn more about natives, and you'll see that in the film that we'll show here at the end. So September 2017, and again, the landscape continues to develop. There's a lot of sounds in that landscape. There's a lot of critters that pollinating insects that are taking this up as their new home. And then June of 2019, we hit that day with when the coneflowers, the traditional purple coneflowers, were in full bloom. And then off to the left is one of the silphiums, compass flowers that are taller, again planted near the pole. So anyway, this landscape has kind of gotten to be a little famous. Got a nice article written in the Missouri Prairie Journal, which provides you a little bit of the history again of what I've been sharing on the project. And so now it just seemed that this library landscape is so unique. All the things that need to be done right are happening here. The right plant selection and having the right care service to take care of it. And as time has gone on, it's the amount of care has really been reduced. Plants do get cut back incrementally through the season as needed, so we don't have a wholesale removal of foliage in the fall anymore. So it just seemed that we ought to document what we've done. And one of the audiences for a educational film are all these schools throughout our state that have education learning gardens out on their school grounds. And I just thought that, why don't we share this story and some of the basics of caring for these learning gardens? Because this is a learning garden here at the library. I mean, it's tied into some programs that the library offers. They've had a seed exchange, a native plant seed exchange. And so anyway, we have brought in, Grow Native has brought the documentary group based in Columbia. And our plan is, and you're going to see the trailer, the video trailer. It's only about 5-6 minutes long. That's the introduction to that will be followed by 4 chapters. So each chapter represents a season of the year, and what do you do during that season to take care of the garden. So I got a few shots in here of the documentary group working on this. And so this is Tom, the videographer, who is flying a drone over the landscape, give you an overview. And then we've had Kelly go on camera to show some of the techniques of taking care and managing for the landscape, and just techniques. She's very neat and tidy as she does her primping of the plants, and has her tarp there to place the spent material on. And then we've done some interviews with her as to her perspective of the landscape and how she has evolved her understanding of natives and their care. We brought the documentary group back in the autumn, October 30th of this past year, to work on the autumn care chapter. And again, showing Kelly, what some techniques being used to care for the plants. Sometimes these plants do get quite big, and we have a little sign there called Leave the Leaves, which is a Grow Native campaign to encourage folks not to bag up all their leaves and take them off the landscape. Leave some there for the benefit of the plants. And again, the pollinators, that some of them live in those leaves over the winter. So just some more shots, and always got to have the beautyberry in the camera because it is a remarkable plant. And as I say, it's the most talked about plant for questions to the library staff. So then we came back in early March. This is kind of the winter care segment. This is where we really start removing foliage. One technique is to take a string trimmer and just start at the top of the plants and start cutting them back incrementally and just leaving all those little stems and foliage fall on the ground, because it's all going to get covered up as the plants emerge. So that's a simple way of cutting them back. Some of these plants we don't like to cut back all the way because there are certain pollinating bees and other insects that lay their eggs in the hollow stems of the plants. So some of those species that have those hollow stems will leave some of those stems up 18 inches or so. So they provide that habitat service. That gets back to our Leave the Leaves campaign. So the ultimate goal of the video is to raise awareness, inspire, and share the basics of four-season native landscape stewardship. And the introductory video chapter has been completed, which you're going to see here in a minute. And then the continued production of the four-season care chapters is still dependent on securing some additional financial support. And we've had support so far to get this project started, but we still need to raise a little money to finish it. So I just want to put a plug in for the library staff here in Ashland, and really the whole district have been wonderful to work with. And here at the Ashland branch, we have some literature. We have the Grow Native resource guide, and those are available to pick up. And then we have some rack cards that give you information about milkweed for supporting the monarch butterfly, and information about the pollinator buffet. And then also what we call host with the most, and that's the plants, particularly tree species, native tree species, that support production of caterpillars that songbirds feed to their young. We all like to put birds feed out, seed to feed the adults, but baby birds don't eat they don't eat seed, they eat caterpillars, and they eat lots of them. So we want to support that. And then I'll put a plug in for our latest designated official fruit tree for the state of Missouri is the pawpaw, which is still blooming with its brown flowers, and its fruit have many uses, and we have a little brochure about that, is about the pawpaw tree, which we don't currently have any here at the library, but maybe an opportunity to put some in an area. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Eric and have him show you this short film.
Oh, I love my job. It always looks better when I leave. I get to be out in nature all the time. It's great exercise. It helps my mind focus on, things that are important. And it's satisfying, very satisfying. Coming from that traditional landscaping where everything is just sow and you see a lot of mulch and things are in rows or groups, or not only are our patrons getting the benefit of those plants, but they're also helping spread that knowledge. It's a good thing that we have here. It's always a great experience to be able to explain why this is a really cool thing that we have in our community that not everybody has.
This is exactly the model. I want to bring teachers down here to show this is what we can do. And now it becomes the library's not only learning on the inside, but it's learning on the outside, and that's what we need to do. Here with the native plants, you need to keep up with it for a while, and then it's less. We want the kids to see that. How can we use schools to model not only good learning in biology and environment, but how can we take that and do it at home too?
I think there's a lot of pride and curiosity about it because, as you know, the native plants aren't the traditional landscaped, very neat and tidy and big beautiful blooms all the time. So this gives them something special and unique, and we thought this would be something that would kind of put Ashland on the map and give the local community pride, but to have it be someplace where people come into the community just to see this.
Are there any, so is that pretty much it, Bill, with the presentation? Unless we have questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, and as I say, I encourage everyone to come by the library if you're in the area. And every time you come, there's something new to see. And it's kind of a bit of an oasis because there's a lot of turf areas surrounding the library beyond the library landscape. So it's a bit of an oasis for pollinators, and so we're hoping that it will spread eventually. They'll be in other areas, but anyway, it's been an exciting project, and I just can't say enough about the Daniel Boone Regional Library team. Been great to work with, and be happy to help out in any way I can.
Yeah, I just started working here in November, so I haven't had it. This is like the spring. I'm starting to see things bloom, and so I'm pretty excited to have the opportunity to see the whole, seasonal cycle.
Very good.
Okay, yeah. If there aren't any more questions, we're gonna close it, and thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. It will be there will be a version, probably somewhat edited, of this on our YouTube channel pretty soon. So if you know somebody who's interested, let them know. If you know somebody who had signed up, because there were more people signed up than actually showed up, so let them know that they can still watch it if there was some reason why they couldn't do it. All right, and with that, I'm going to say thank you and goodbye to everyone.
Take care.
Okay, bye.